各位朋友，大家好，非常欢迎大家回到下午的这个场次。那我知道刚刚休息的时间非常的短，但是我们非常开心，也非常高兴各位朋友能够回到这个现场，进行我们今天下午的第3场的这个讨论。那我是王志明，非常荣幸接受龙应台基金会的邀请来主持这样的一个场次。那由于我们今天的讲者主要以英文来发言，所以我待会的这个简单的主持，大家也会以英文来进行，还请大家多多的谅解。First of all, I just want to welcome you all to this session, and particularly all 3 speakers for this forum. I have a little thing to say before I turn the microphone to you all. The first thing I want to say to all of you is that how lucky we are to have this forum, and how important it is to have this discussion in this time and moment, given what is going on around the world, what is going on in the Taiwan Strait, and so on and so forth. In a way, it's a very important time and moment for us to think about the conflict, not us the past, but us, the present and the potential future. Much of the discussion earlier today has been focused on the proactive view on conflict resolution. The panel today for this session is going to be looking at conflict resolution in a post-conflict context or scenarios. Let me start by saying that Taiwan, as you know, is an island of migration and conflict and layered memories. The 1949 migration, for instance, is a product of conflicts and layered memories. Our island has been processing these issues for decades. And in the worst case scenario, we are likely to experience migration, conflicts, and torture memory again, and perhaps in an ever greater scale and density. So these issues that the 3 speakers are going to be presenting to us are not distant or irrelevant, but rather very important way to investigate the present as we move gingerly through the conflicts toward peace. The panel is called Peace in Practice, Memory, Power, and Struggles to be Heard. And I think this is a wonderful title for a panel like this. And we are very honored to have 3 guest speakers here. All 3 of you have been introduced in the morning, but I'll just very quickly mention their name. To my right is Daniela, who is currently partner and research coordinator in the Refugee Self Reliance Initiative in Latin America. She has been helping the refugees to seek protection and justice. Next to her is Benjamin Abtan, who is currently president of European Grassroots Anti-Racism Movement, who has been combating racism and hate speech on the ground in various sites across Europe and Africa and Middle East. Last but not least, to the far right is Cao Kefei 老师, who is currently the director of Nomadic Minutes, which is a performance group based in Berlin, and she has worked with trauma through theater work. All 3 speakers, as you can see, come to us from very complex roots of migration and movement, maintaining memories elsewhere, and speaking to power for peace and justice. They work in the post-conflict scenarios with the hope to prevent and reduce conflict from exploding into violence. Peace, as we have discussed, is not a state of quietness or meekness or weakness, but a dynamic process of dealing with pain, senses, and emotions. This is why I encourage the 3 speakers to focus in their presentation on the struggles to be heard, because in a humanist view, that is the key to peace. We need to heed or hear not only the voices that are struggling to be heard, but also why and how they or we must face these struggles. So I'll invite our speakers to reflect on their experiences on this issue, as well as their experiences in Taiwan in relation to that. For example, your visit to Chih-Ming, and then we'll open up for some conversation in between us and also Q&A from the floor. So without further ado, may I have the first speaker in that case would be Cao 老师.
大家好，下午好。我在上午的时候，就是我说到，我选择1949年中国内战作为正在筹备的这个剧场项目。那我先讲一讲啊，我就是其实我们这次已经待了2星期了，而且说过我来过台湾已经5次了，所以我感受到台湾的变化。有非常可喜的变化，就像我今天听到的讲座，大家 一些发言给我很有启发，但我也看到一些忧虑。在这一些短短的时间里，包括我们去了金门，然后我有一些观察，也有一些疑问，也有一些思考。我把这些残篇能与大家共享一下。再提一下《大江大海1949》，因为里边最后一篇《寻人启事》有这么一段话：即使内战已经过去了60年，海峡对岸的寻人启事从来也没有间断过。太多的伤口没有愈合，太多的亏欠没有补偿。那今天我们到了2025年，我当然就会要问，离1949年已经快80年过去了，那哪些的寻人启事仍在延续着？哪些的伤口还被压在沉默的箱底？以及哪些亏欠还被忽视，甚至被掩盖？为什么？当然，我还会问，在今日世界动荡的时刻，今天我们上午也感受到，即使我们正在亲眼目睹战争的残酷，为什么呼吁理性、智慧、维护和平的时候，会遭到那么多条件反射般的这种攻击？这些攻击、这些反射来自哪里？我下面想讲一讲，就是我跟难民青少年的工作。那是在2016年，这些来自叙利亚的青少年，他们来到了德国，然后我每周去这个难民就是暂住的地方，去跟他们每周举行一次工作坊。其实所谓的工作坊，我认为是来自于游戏和表演。我希望能重建他们生活中一点点乐趣，或者一种生活的秩序。这是我和他们在做游戏。我们很多的游戏是在室外的草坪上。我们看到这个画面的这个最左边是这个翻译，他在柏林已经生活了很多年。其他4位是参与的女孩子，和这些青少年，因为我们的语言不方便呢，所以大家就会我会去让他们尝试去画画。我说你们想到什么就画什么，最好是跟你们的经历有关系的。所以他们画了很多的画，其中这些画面里边有关于家乡、房屋、太阳、小溪、果树，但是我们再看会发生什么？这是他们的画，然后他们就开始画从天而降的炸弹，他们也画在山脉间逃亡的人群，他们也画小船，因为他们必须通过船才能够通过地中海来到欧洲。还有他们的眼睛，惊恐的眼睛和流淌的泪水。所以我再讲一下，就是那些孩子们后来又尝试把自己的经历用他们的母语写下来。其中一位13岁的叙利亚男孩，他写道，我读一下他写的：在航行途中，我们的船撞上了礁石，坏了，所有的人都掉进了海里，或者跳入海中。我如此害怕，他再也见不到我的爸爸了，因为他此时不在我们身边。和我一起整个4个月，从头到尾一起都合作参与的一个15岁的伊拉克的女孩，她表演了这样的一个场景：凌晨3点， 我们都陷入了恐慌，无法入睡，直到偷渡贩子来到了我们住处，一辆油罐车，12名的妇女和孩子先上车，接着15名的男子挤了进去，空间极其拥挤，小孩子都服用了安眠药，以保持他们的安静。对，我问他们，这些孩子们，你们最大的愿望是什么？他们回答说，他们希望全家能够团圆，他们希望上学。所以，这些这个难民青少年，就是说，当我们说到孩子是未来的时候，也就是说，孩子是我们的社会建设一个非常积极的组成部分的时候，那么我在想，我们给这些孩子什么样的未来？那我再讲一下这次我们去金门的一点经历。我7月份的时候，其实从福州的黄岐村坐了小三通，来到了马祖南竿，当时花了半个小时的时间。然后上周我和我们这个和平论坛的同仁们从台北飞往了金门岛，这就是金门岛，不到1个小时。我才想起，当时我读《大江大海1989》的时候，里面说到，哇，此岸和彼岸就是邻居。我真正感受到了这是什么意思。当我在那里从此岸看下彼岸的时候，我也与两岸的那里的老人们、年轻人有了一些交谈，所以我也体会到为什么他们那么渴望有一些安宁的日子。我也想感受到他们可能的恐惧是什么。那么回到了台北，我也听到台北另外一种声音啊，说那是金门人，我们是台湾人。为什么有这么大的就是说区分啊？那么这些金门人、马祖人的声音是否能够被听到呢？我们在台湾的人，或者我们在大陆的人，如何面对这样的恐惧？我们在大陆有另外一种恐惧。在一天夜晚，我们有几个人一起去散步，在金门美好的夜色里的那个走，然后我们就碰到了这么一个原来遗留下来的残骸。我在柏林2年前去过参加过看过一个展览。这个展览呢，是一位法国阿尔及利亚裔的艺术家叫卡德阿提亚的一个装置作品，名字叫《我控诉》。他把在一战期间那些面部严重的受伤受毁的士兵们的真实的照片，然后把它转换成雕刻成这样子的一些面具，用的是一些非洲的一些雕刻的手法，材料是一种木头。这个展览，我虽然在这个展览期间，我走过这些面具，我在那儿逗留了很长时间。虽然我知道我面对的是一个艺术品，已经创作出来的另外一种作品，但是我感觉到我仿佛身在其中，我仿佛看到那些受伤的士兵们，看到他们的脸，看到他们的痛苦。我也想把这张 在这里让大家看到，是不是只有从战争中能够幸存下来的人，才能知道生命真正宝贵的是什么。最后，我想谈一谈失败者的剧场，这也是我今天早晨提了一下，因为这个作品是我现在正在准备的，而且我感觉是一个漫长的过程，因为我要读很多东西，我要了解很多。它是以大江大海1949作为一个蓝本，然后我呢是试图想通过一个叙述者，把个人的故事与历史事件，把纪实材料与一些反思交织在一起，让表演与影像、舞台与观众能够彼此连接。我个人认为，我坚信剧场是一个相遇的空间。我相信艺术的感性的力量，它不像是一个我们所策略性的解决方案的，而是它通过它的感性，让观众获得一种共情，一种就是我们说恐惧也好，怜悯也好，这样的一种共情，以至于对一个对方，另外一个甚至是他的就是一个他的敌人，他可以用一个作为人的一个最基本的一个出发点去理解。所以，我想最后讲一个我也知道的一位作家，其实他是一个在山东出生的台湾人，他一生跨越了中国大陆与台湾，经历了战乱、逃难和他的求学，以后他成为了律师，叫高秉涵。高秉涵先生已经不在世了，但是他写了这么一本书叫《回家之路》。他写道：没有在深夜痛哭过的人，不足以谈人生。对，呼唤一个失败者的剧场，对我来说，是否就是让我们在寻找一条超越国界、超越族群、通向我们一种心灵归宿的一个家、一条路？所以我愿意与在座的每一位来共同的守护这一份特别来之不易的和平。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Ke-Fei, for this really moving and touching presentation on your experiences working with the refugee kids from Syria, as well as sharing your next project on the what you call the theater of the loser. I think the presentation really brings out the importance of working on the ground with people who have actually suffered. As I said, it's a post-conflict scenario where the suffering has been or has to be in the foreground of our engagement. Next, we'll also invite, I think the order should be Benjamin, to share your experience working on the ground as well. So.
Thank you. So I believe that civilians caught up in conflict are increasingly struggling to make their voices heard, and that will become an even greater challenge in the period ahead. I also think that local actors and civil society, including here in Taiwan, have a new role to play to prevent conflict and to resist if it happens. We are used to thinking of peace as opposed to war. But I believe that the new challenges that we are facing is how to develop peace and democracy in times of war or conflict. I'll try to explain why. Today, the international community is very weak and unable to prevent conflict or to stop them. The large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia started over 3.5 years ago. The war between Azerbaijan and Armenia ended only after Azeris invaded the whole Karabakh. The war between Hamas and Israel has been going on for close to 2 years. And when a peace agreement was concluded between Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo in June this year, it was under the supervision of the US alone. The multilateral system and international law, which used to empower the international community, has become ineffective. And this is not a parenthesis. This is the new situation, the new reality in which we are living. As a consequence, countries see war to be an efficient way of solving problems. The military doctrines that have been implemented in different parts of the world since the war in Ukraine, some may say since the war in Chechnya, massively expose civilians to harm. This is the case for Ukrainians. It has been a case for Armenians in Karabakh. The same is true for Israelis and for Palestinians. Therefore, developing peace and democracy during conflict and war has become one of the most pressing challenges of our time. And to meet this challenge, I believe that local actors have a role to play. Cities, regions, agglomerations, and civil society organizations have recently demonstrated that they are able to address global challenges like climate change, migration, and war. At a time when central governments are becoming increasingly unable to address the needs of local populations and are focused on their core missions, local actors must take responsibility and fill the void. As a source of inspiration, I will share with you the example of the program that I've established to support civilians in Ukraine. When Russia launched its large-scale invasion in February 2022, I called my friends there in Ukraine to know how they were. Thanks to them and to my previous experiences in Georgia and with Chechens, I understood that civilians would face mass violence. I wanted to see what additional support I could bring to local populations on top of the huge support that individuals were providing during the first weeks. I believe that local actors could do much more. So I went to Ukraine, and I started by listening to mayors, governors, activists, local public figures, and journalists. I expected the main need to be organizing long-term immigration of families. But I discovered that the priority was in fact taking children out of the country for a short period of time. On a Saturday afternoon in Lviv, the organizer of a refugee center told me that all children had to take medicines for their stomach aches every evening to be able to sleep. On that evening, the governor of the region, Maxim Kozinski, spontaneously identified the same priority. This symbolized the good cooperation between local authorities and civil society in Ukraine. And this cooperation enabled to resist the Russian invasion and helps them continue to do so to this day. Maxim told me that the UN and large international NGOs were unable to meet the needs of local populations because they did not cooperate well with Ukrainian local authorities. These organizations acted as they were used to doing when they intervened in Africa and some countries in Asia. That is to say, by replacing the authorities, not cooperating with them, often with a lack of respect for the local social organization. In Ukraine, meaning in a European, Christian, white and developed country, where robust institutions have continued working well through the war, this was impossible. But the international organizations have not gotten adapted to this new situation, so they lack efficiency. When I came back to France, I recruited cities and regions to welcome children for short educational respite stays. And I established partnerships between local authorities in Ukraine, France, and Germany. Today, over 2,000 children have been supported through several tens of local-to-local partnerships, which have been newly established. And since the beginning of the talk, you can see behind me pictures of Ukrainian children enjoying these peaceful respite stays. This example demonstrates how peace and democracy can be developed during conflict or war. through the collaboration of local stakeholders from various countries, working closely with civil society. The condition for this success has been the strong social cohesion in Ukraine around a few key objectives: being an independent country, an independent nation, enjoying a democratic system, preventing Russia from dominating, and building a future within the European Union. And I believe that here there are lessons and sources for inspirations for Taiwan. To prevent violent actions by Communist China and to resist more strongly if it happens, I believe that local actors can play a stronger role and that enhancing social cohesion will be useful. Both the government and the army have to do their part. However, we cannot defer all responsibility to them. Society and local actors also bear responsibility. Addressing the political, social, historical, and identity divides within society would make it less vulnerable and enhance its democratic nature. I know it is very challenging, as polarization is on the rise here, like in all democracies around the world. I also know that tensions related to identity and past events are high, and I understand why silence and avoidance are usual responses. However, finding homegrown ways to address these hot topics without creating too much tension within society and without harming harmony is a challenge that society can and must take more strongly here. Following the example of Ukraine, I believe that local actors here can make society stronger in establishing more partnerships and cooperation with stakeholders around the world, with which they share values and interests to better address the needs of population. While these efforts alone will not be sufficient to prevent Communist China from using force to take over Taiwan, they would increase the price of a military takeover, make this takeover less likely in the short and mid-term, and make society more democratic in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin, for this really short but also important observation about peace work action as well as democracy. And the connection here is really importantly made through this case that you had about the Ukrainian refugee, particularly children's, the 2,000 lucky ones that have been helped. Since you were speaking in English, so let me just commentate a little bit on Chinese so that I think it will perhaps help the communication a bit better. 我想刚刚 Benjamin 有一个很重要的观察或提醒，就是说透过这些他自己的行动经验，看到的是在所有国际机构的协助当中，很重要的是当地的行动者的一个参与。那么所谓的民主的概念，大家也要在这个当地行动者的参与的这个里头来做呈现跟展现。那么就他刚刚所提供的这个案例来说，就是这些乌克兰逃难出来的小孩，透过这些城市里头所谓市民社会跟国际组织的一些合作，让他们能够获得一些更好的照顾，而不是说单纯的把这样的责任一味的只是交给国际组织来承担。那这个我想有他们在历史现场当中工作的一些经验，跟特别的地方，也许待会还要请这个Benjamin再跟我们做一点比较细部的分享。Now, in any case, I think it was great to hear that piece of information and also the importance of democracy at work. Next, we'll also want to hear from Daniela on particularly your experience of working with the refugee. And I think all three of you have this particular connection in working on the ground with people who have suffered and finding ways to help them to survive any of those fires. So last but not least, let's welcome Daniela.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to start with a phrase that a Mexican journalist shared with me in one of my travels to the United States, and that phrase stayed in my mind. And she described herself as a fertile seed that arrive in a fertile soil. So it's a powerful phrase. This metaphor captures this kind of emotional and transformative journey of displacement, one that demands reinvention, but also holds the potential for growth. So I would like to dedicate this presentation to many of my friends who are refugees, also family members, and start with that. Also, I'm going to talk on my personal capacity, and I would like to make some emphasis in Latin America, the context in Latin America and the Caribbean, where, well, the context is surrounded by a regional reality shaped by organized crime, gang violence, economic collapse, and also democratic erosion and authoritarian regimes. So, well, besides that, there is a global crisis that multiply this kind of humanitarian resources that are strained, and we are witnessing a humanitarian reset where priorities are shifting, funding is contracting, and competition among organizations is intensifying. So in this context, we have, or we must to include and recognize the transformative, creative, and political power, not only of our refugees and migrants, but also include the host communities into the solution. They have to be taken into account. And also, well, I would like to start with an essential question. Who is a refugee? And what does international protection truly mean? Well, according to the 1951 Refugee Convention, a refugee is someone who is outside their country of origin due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Well, but in Latin America, this definition has been expanded by the Cartagena Declaration of 1984, which includes those fleeing generalized violence, massive human rights violations, and other circumstances that disturb public order. Well, I can stop a little bit here. The things you leave behind when you are forced to flee your home country. For example, everything here is in Spanish and have a purpose. For example, you leave behind in some cases your language. You arrive to a new country and you have no friends, no family, no documents. And can you imagine the impact of that? You have to face a lot of risk, no social capital, sometimes, well, no, you don't have your needs covered. So it's important to take that into account when we are going to talk about refugees and how to be heard, because it's very difficult to have an impact in advocacy if you don't meet your most basic needs. So that is important to outline. There is also a lot of factors preventing effective international protection. We can talk about xenophobia, political manipulation, discrimination, racism. So that is why it's important also take into account the host community, and I mentioned that. It's important when we are talking about international protection that we are not talking only about something that is merely legal. It's not just a legal status. It refers to the safeguards granted to individuals who cannot return their home country because doing so will expose them to a serious harm and their country is unable or unwilling to protect them. This protection can take the form of refugee status, subsidiary protection, or other humanitarian measures depending on national and regional frameworks. So these definitions are not abstract. They are lived realities, and it's very important to get into account that they shape who gets counted, who gets protected, and who gets left behind. So also why I would like to make very clear with the difference between a refugee and a migrant. I explained what a refugee is a person who have been forced to flee their country of origin, and they cannot access, for example, to legal assistance or consular assistance, but a migrant maybe can go to their consulate if they lost their documents. Also, it's important to outline that there are many people who left their countries because they're forced to, and then despite cover or meets the criteria of being a refugee, they don't identify themselves such as, because they don't have the idea of the definition. They only flee their country, their home country, but they don't know, they don't have this kind of information, legal information, so they don't ask for legal advice, and they don't claim asylum. So it's very important to take that into account. There are also other peoples who already have the information, but they decide to not seek asylum because they can find another legal pathways to stay in a country. So they cannot go back to their home countries, but they are not legally recognized as refugees. So they stay in a country or host country, but with a different legal status. And so there are a lot of subtle differences. But in this context, it's very fragile when we are talking about international protection. And in here, the responsibility for protecting displaced populations, it's important to emphasize that continues to fall disproportionately on low and middle income countries. In Latin America, for example, there are a lot of nationalist narratives and xenophobic rhetoric on the rise because there are misinformation, hate speech, and racialized stereotypes, especially on social media. What happened? That fueled discrimination against refugees, currently, particularly against Venezuelans, for example, also against Haitians and racialized women. We are seeing that many Haitian refugees face systemic exclusion due to language barriers and racial prejudice. Also, women from Venezuela, for example, are often hypersexualized, exposing them to heightened risk of trafficking and sexual violence. So when we are talking about these topics, it's not just a humanitarian issue, it's a political one. So protection must be reimagined to address structural inequalities, intercommunity tensions, and the root causes of xenophobia. But despite these challenges, Latin America has pioneered inclusive protections frameworks. As I mentioned, the Cartagena Declaration to regional solidarity mechanisms. The region has expanded the definition of refugees and embraced integration models that challenge narrow legal categories. So Latin America offers lessons for global policy. It shows that protection is not just about borders, it's about belonging. So protection is not a label, it's a life experience. And it's very interesting I had a phone call with one of my friends, Wendy, who is a refugee. She's working in the UN, but at the same time, she was reflecting about the fact to be a refugee and have this kind of label. So who I am? I am Wendy, but at the same time, I'm Wendy the refugee, the lawyer, but the lawyer refugee, and how to manage that in a context when you are surrounded with other colleagues. So it's very interesting. This kind of journey is also psychological. It's a psychological journey. So that is why I say that is a lived experience. And I mentioned the fact that many people fall outside the classic refugee definition, but still face persecution, violence, on climate-related displacement. So our systems must evolve to reflect these realities, embracing pluralistic, context-sensitive approach. And we are talking about context-sensitive approach. We have to mention child. Not many mention that, but child on the move, they have to take into account. They have special protection needs. Well, across Latin America, refugees' stories blend trauma path with resilience, and this path to integration is shaped by legal documentation, financial inclusion. Can you imagine if you don't have the documents, how to open a bank account? For some, having a bank account is very easy, but for refugees, it's a huge, huge challenge. Even if they have this national card as a refugee, in some countries, if you don't have the passport, you cannot access, but you cannot have the passport because you are a refugee. You cannot go to the embassy of your country of origin. So there are many small details that we have to reflect on. Also, the fact of the employment. If you don't have the bank account open, how can someone employing you, how to pay? How can you receive your salary? So this kind of situation is in the real life. Also, the language adaptation, recognition of competences. So maybe you were a recognized doctor in your home country, but you arrive in a new context with no papers, without anything. So how can you prove your competence? So it's a lot that involves that. So it's important that we reflect that when host communities provide the right conditions, these displaced individuals, they can be the architects of their home future and enriching the host communities is very important. Well, we must move beyond rigid categories and embrace a protection paradigm that reflects the fluidity of human mobility. And Latin America offers a blueprint rooted in solidarity, innovation, and the recognition that anyone, anywhere, could one day cross that line. So, well, I would like to outline that, and the erosion of democratic norms, surging xenophobia, and this kind of displacement in Latin America are not isolated trends. They are warnings, and they demand a response that is bold, inclusive, and grounded in justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for sharing your experiences of working with refugees, particularly with emphasis on the practical difficulties of settlement, of moving through the host countries, of facing, xenophobia, racism, hatred on an everyday level, and while maintaining, certain sense of solidarity and simply, being there as a human. I think these are very difficult work to do, and it also offers quite a bit of issues for us to kind of reflect on. So allow me to also switch to Chinese at this moment to make a better conversation. And with that, I also would invite all three of you to comment on each other. But before that, let me just say a few words. 刚刚几位朋友的这个分享，其实很清楚地展现了一个我觉得在面对所谓战争与和平的问题的时候，如何解决或如何正视战争所带来的这个影响，或者是说受难或逃亡所带来的这种很负面但是又很真实的这个影响。Daniela 在之前我们的讨论当中常常会说，他觉得他所讨论的这个拉丁美洲的这些问题，也许对台湾的读者来说或朋友来讲有点遥远，好像很难引起共鸣。但是如果各位回头想一想，我们的长者，我们的对我来讲，我的祖父母辈，其实他们都是逃难来的，也就是龙老师在大江大海写的这些失败者，我们就是失败者的后代。整个台湾社会种种的这些问题，种种这些纷扰，其实很大的程度是因为这些战争并没有真的结束，很大的原因是因为这些战争依然在我们的心里，以及在我们的社会里头以不同的形式展现跟产生影响。所以在这意义上面，对于所谓的受难或逃难的这个讨论，其实离我们并不遥远。那么同时，我想另外一个要补充说明的，也让在座的3位朋友了解的是，刚刚大家涉及的有一些部分，对台湾来说，其实一直有在立法上面讨论，但是还没有实现的是所谓的难民法。这也许是我们在之前的联系上面并没有跟大家分享到的，就是台湾其实有一个关于难民法的讨论，但是一直没有充分的实现。那么同时，台湾社会又对这个战争所带来的这个逃难的这个经验，慢慢的感到有一些的遥远，以至于在今天所谓的24次世界大战结束80年的今天，我们对于如何解决怎么解释或说明这样的一个历史事件，有非常不同的一个说法跟不同的表述。而这里头其实带来的是因为这里头带来就与之而来的是许多不同的记忆跟观念。OK， 所以我想接下来要请3位朋友再多一点点的讨论，大概是说在你们的经验里头，在你们经验里头，当你们在面对这些难民也好，或者说来自不同地方的人也好，怎么样跟他们讨论他们很需要说但是没有办法说的这些记忆，来，比方讲，刚刚克菲给我们一些例子是说这些小朋友画了一些画，刚刚 Daniela 给我们的一个例子是他的 footprints， 来，上面有很多的东西是他没有办法带来的。Benjamin 提到的是，他们很多的实际的困难是没有办法被这个国际组织来解决的。So, again, switching back to English, how do you engage with these difficult emotions? How do you engage with these difficult memories when they come to you? Us, and organizers as respondent to their suffering and anxieties or worries. So I'll open up like maybe 2 minutes each to sort of reflect on that based on your experiences as well, but also just how you think, if there's anything that really jumps to your mind in terms of how that aspect gets dealt with in the particular work that you are doing, or you have been doing. Would that be okay? And of course, if you're interested, feel free to comment on each other's, presentation as well. I think there are a lot of crossovers in terms of democracy, xenophobia, and so on and so forth. So anyone want to take a dab first? Tosh,
okay. 我就讲，其实刚才我讲到跟难民青少年，就叙利亚、伊拉克还有阿富汗的部分的这些人的一些接触。其实我们后来在4个月以后是有一个呈现的一个演出的，题目叫《夜奔》，因为把他们的这个逃亡，而且大多数的逃亡确实都是在夜里，所以跟当时的中国的传统的戏曲《林冲夜奔》有了一个连接。还有呢，就是当时来看的很多的观众是他们的父母们。我觉得那次对于我来说，就是看完演出以后和这些父母们的聊天，非常的重要。就是他们突然发现，原来 他们自己的经历、他们的苦难是可以被他们的孩子们，因为他们也经历了这些，通过另一种方式来诠释或者来表演的。另外呢，由于看的人里边也有德国当地的观众，所以就是说看完以后，大家就会有一些讨论啊，或者有一些有兴趣的人会来问这些问题。我认为就是说，这时候就我个人认为，演出只是一部分而已，而后面它所产生的这个讨论和互相的一种对话是非常重要的。对，这个可能是可以跟他，所以在这样子的一个讨论里边，我也感觉到，包括对于我来讲，就是我原来对于这些文化，包括叙利亚的文化背景什么，我是陌生的。但是通过这一个时期的这样子的接触，以及这样密切的一种大家互相之间的这种交流，其实我们的交流很多是非常身体化的，所以很多的障碍就没有了。我们真的是获得了非常好的信任，不仅是这样，有的还成为了朋友。你才发现我特别认同达尼埃拉讲的，其实就是说，我们如果去掉了什么难民啊，什么这种这样子的一些名称，其实我们都是人，真的是，我看到了他们的一种特别的不得已，所以对，我觉得这个是最重要的。
谢谢曹老师。Benjamin, please.
So I remember a group of kids, about 10, 11, who came from Lozova, which is a town east of Kharkiv, in eastern part of Ukraine. And they were welcome in Tomblaine, which is a small town close to Strasbourg, in the east part of France. At some point, they were playing football, and there was an air alarm. In fact, it was because every first Wednesday at 12:15 in France, since World War II, there are 2 minutes of air alarm. So they are not real air alarms, but all the children, when they heard that, or the Ukrainian children, when they heard that, they stopped moving. They put their head down, and they were like puppets. Then, the educators told them that it was not a real one, and that they were safe there. But they were taken very strongly by this emotion because it reminded them of the true air alarms that were taking place every week, and in some period every day in their town. This has been the opportunity for the educators from France to speak with the educators from Ukraine, and for the children to speak about what is life there, what it means to be in security or not with the concepts, but with very concrete examples of from children to children. To do so, there were, 2 conditions. The first one is to have people who can translate in terms of culture. So educators, Ukrainian educators coming from Ukraine with the children from Ukraine. And also educators in France being able to translate and to explain the culture in France, so that there would be this dialogue. Also, it was important to have a support, meaning we ensured that there were psychologists coming with every group of children, not because they were high risk of having problems when they were in France. They might be, but mainly because we wanted to ensure that they would be followed by people who have understood that what this trip in France would mean to them, and be able to work with the kids back in Ukraine, knowing all of that, about having gone through all of that.
Daniela?
Well, I was thinking a lot about, the first step is to talk about difficult topics, uncomfortable truths, this kind of issues. So when we were reflecting about barriers to being heard, I mentioned before the fact of maybe culture, but I don't like to mention a culture issue as a barrier, but it's maybe a challenge. But the language could be a barrier, and to be heard. And I mentioned the fact that when you just arrive a new country, you have to need your most basic needs and learn a new language. You don't have time for advocacy, for example. And also, even among the most recognized refugee leaders who are already recognized and have many years in the country, many of them, they don't have the English skills, and that is a problem because leave little room for advocacy in international forum or civil participation in forums in Europe or the United States or even here. So we are struggling with that. And so it's very, very difficult. Also, I would like to mention and outline, I told you before, the fact that sometimes some refugees and migrants feel in a situation where some people have condescending attitudes toward them, patronizing. So when someone, for example, a humanitarian worker or a journalist or a social worker have this kind of attitude, condescending attitude toward refugees, that undermines the truth and a weakened dialogue. So it's important because it's like it's a symbolic violence. So yeah, you are talking with another person. It's like you and me. It's not like, yeah, it's this kind of talk, like you are a refugee, you need my help, I am going to help you. No, you are talking with an adult or with a child also. We have to be very sensitive and have this kind of sensitive approach. So I wanted to share that because we need to talk on that for having successful practices for amplifying refugees' voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. That's a very, very important observation. Again, 我想就是刚刚其实提到了很多很细节的地方，特别我想 Daniela 最后的一个讨论，涉及到了当我们面对逃难者或者是难民的时候，我们如何与之对话，或者说我们如何能够听见他们的故事。我们刚刚不断的在讲这个场次的主题是如何听见那些正在挣扎想要被听见的故事。这里头这涉及的不仅仅是一个倾听的意愿，还有整个基础设施，是不是一个倾听的基础设施是不是能够存在，包含他们的安全，包含语言，包含彼此的信任的这些关系等等的。那所以在这意义上面，我想这里头翻译就变成是或者语言是一个很关键的议题。那我在这里稍微跟大家分享一个我刚刚发现的一个意外插曲。那这意外插曲也跟我们待会要讨论的话题，我想非常相关。这意外插曲就是我一直看的是英文的 program， 我没有发现中文的 program 里头那个 session title 是不一样的。所以如果各位看中文的 program 是记忆与权力、和平教育不能等。那么我之所以要提这个事情，是因为一方面这里涉及到我们刚刚不断在谈的是，当你在做一个跨国的这些应对的时候，语言问题一直是如此，一直是一个实际的障碍或是挑战。同时，刚刚所有的这些讨论，其实涉及的就是一个教育的问题，也就是说，所谓的和平，不是一个静态的东西，而是我们如何让和平成为一个，简单的说，成为一种文化， right？ 或者说用英文来讲，可能更容易一点点。Rather than thinking about peacekeeping or peace building, how can we do peace thinking, right? Or peace as culture, or peace through culture. 那我觉得他们在做的很多的工作，特别是像克菲在做剧场，很大的作用就在于，透过剧场这样的空间，使得这些声音能够被释放，而且让来听的观众或者来参与的朋友能够听到这样的声音。而且我觉得特别有意思的是一个跨世代的这个部分。所以我点出这个 翻译的问题，主要是要邀请各位朋友一起来讨论跟思考，就是说当我们听到这些受难或者逃难的故事的时候，包括我们自己不同世代的这些差异，我们如何来重新去想一想那些我们可能应该听到但是没有听到的故事，我们如何建造一个环境，让这些故事能够更勇敢地被讲出来，而不要都等着龙老师写了文章以后被骂了以后，大家才开始想起来说啊，还有这些事儿。我们如何面对这些记忆上面表述的差异，不管是抗战胜利也好，或是中战也好，我们如何调和这些不同的表述方式，来创造一个比较能够这个怎么讲和平共处的一个文化环境。那所以我简单讲这些，主要是希望能够邀请各位朋友提供一些建议或想法或者是问题。那我们大概时间不会很多，所以我们大家可以开放2个问题在现场。看现在的朋友有没有，中间这位朋友，然后右手边的男生，中间穿紫色衣服的女生首先发问，好不好？我们先请中间这位朋友，麻烦给他麦克风，然后是右边的这个朋友。
我用中文哈，就是很感谢3位就是有人的分享，然后因为我自己本身在纽约的时候有做过也是带领那边的，就是 United Nations 的一些孩子的一些活动，然后我一直在思索一个问题，就是说我们现在3位主讲者在谈述的时候，是针对于那些比较受难的孩子们，正在经过苦难，或者是经过了苦难，就是 try to make them feel better 这样子一个时候我所做的一些事情。可是有更多的孩子们，我觉得就是孩子对孩子们自己本身的比较柔软的心，比较没有经过很多世俗化的心来看待彼此的这样的一个因缘机会，它在不同的国家都正在发生。那我觉得教育者的一个姿态是，其实我们做 facilitator， 我们就是在不同的国境里头，在看望着对方的受难的这些孩子们。然后可能就是说我是连着上个阶段的一些话题，就是在 trustful platform， 在我们所提供给予的一个网络的一个连结的时候，刚好可以用在国际的孩子们他们心生的互通有无的这个部分，有没有可能营造出来，也是这样的一个即时性的？刚好这个地方有孩子们在受苦，另外一边因为就是很多的老师们的一个协助底下，让另外一群比较悠哉、比较的自在的孩子们，已经有在思索，然后呢，能够提供给彼此两端的一个资源，一个这个东西，假如我们能够用现在的数位化的东西，也做这样子一个努力的话，我觉得有可能，假如到时候一个处境刚好是颠倒过来的时候，我们可以也有很多的国际的支援，是由这些我们在讲说由教育扎根最年轻的这个 generation， 他们能够感受到的，然后由他们自发性的去发展开来，这是我很希望可以看到的一个未来。谢谢。
好，非常谢谢您的分享啊，非常重要的一个话题。那刚刚右手边有一位朋友举手，我们是不是可以先把麦克风给他
？Hello. I have a question for Mr. Abtan. So, in your opening, you claimed that because of the fastly changing international order, it is we should focus on preserving and developing democracy in the context of conflict. However, in the case of Taiwan, a hot war has not broken out yet. Are you saying that right now it's too late for Taiwan for Taiwan and China to come together to work out some alternative? Instead, we should already prepare for war and prepare to preserve democracy in the context of war.
Benjamin, can you hold a bit? I just want to make sure if there's other. 我刚刚还有看到一个朋友举手，我们是不是可以最后一位，然后我们再请3位讲者一并回复，好不好？这位左手边这位年轻的同学，看起来。
我想要问的是，就是能不能就是从艺术的方式，然后就是从 提供帮助的国家当地人们的角度，然后去尝试让他们可以理解，因为他们可能会觉得，如果都是以那些可能会需要帮助的国家那些人民所遭受的故事，他们不一定会那么深有同感，所以可能是他们为什么会变成现在这样，会变得那么保守，可能是从他们自己的角度，然后去尝试去解决或者是消弭那些比较根深蒂固的情绪感受还有价值观这样子。
好，谢谢您的分享。然后我们最后一位朋友，刚刚那个讲话的朋友，对，麻烦简短，谢谢。
好，大家好，不好意思，我从台东来，路比较远，坚持举手又坐得比较偏，不是坐在正中心的蛋黄区。我刚刚可以顺着，因为原住民一直被点名。那我的母亲是卑南族，我的爸爸就是1949到台湾来的，老家是在浙江绍兴。我不是要说我的经历，但是我想说的就是龙老师的《大江大海》之后，我们的原住民作家把戴老师写了一个走过，叫做他的那个文本就是一个台籍老兵的叙事，而是不同历史脉络底下的人的生存。那蔡正良老师就是台东大学的公视系的老师呢，他带着阿美族都兰部落的族人，其中那个部分就是高沙义勇军回到战场上，带着艺术家的作品叫做《高沙的翅膀》，他拍成一个纪录片。那再来，我觉得因为早上我觉得这个场次真的是很了不起，就是把两个受苦的民族放在一起。但是有一个泰雅族的作家瓦伊斯诺干，他在2011年的时候出版了一本诗集，叫《当世界留下两行诗》，其中有一个特辑就是用巴勒斯坦做一个专辑。也许我可以念它短短的4句：巴勒斯坦不是人种，不是国，不是民族，我们是所有国家动物的标签。然后另外一个小诗叫做《定义恐怖分子》，所有的巴勒斯坦难民营的小孩都是尚未引爆的自杀炸弹客。然后这个诗人在台湾的高山上，他为巴勒斯坦人在1948年之后流离失所，他说的话是：直到今日，苦难经历了62年，我以无能为力感到羞愧。这是我们台湾原住民作家为这个世界上面的灾难留下来的一点讯息。我觉得不是没有，应该是大家要主动去找。谢谢。
好，非常谢谢这位朋友。时间有限，我就不再开放现场的提问。那我很快的先请 Benjamin 就刚刚那个问题做一个回答。Is it too late for Taiwan and China to come together？ 然后如果克菲跟Daniela 有想要再回应的话，then you can respond to the comments if you wish after Benjamin.
I don't know if there will be war or not, and you know here much better than I do. I understand there is tension, so it's what I call conflict here. A few days ago, a friend of mine sent to me an article from Le Monde saying high tension in the region because of the stories of the boat recently. He asked me, okay, how do people speak about that? Is it crisis there? I told him, okay, there is like a huge gap between the international coverage and how things are felt here. But despite this huge gap, I understand the situation as being a situation of tension, if not conflict. And it is within this situation, with this current tension, that I feel civil society and local actors can take, a more stronger role in order to enhance democracy and enhance peace during this period, this current period, not waiting for a period of military, conflict, which I don't know if it will take place and when it will take place. And to address shortly what you said, I am not an expert in children, but I know that there is strong expertise within cities in France, in Germany, and in Ukraine about this. So when developing the program, we didn't try to, create an expertise, but we relied on the expertise which is present at the local level. But the cities in Ukraine, in France and Germany didn't know how to cooperate with each other in times of war. So this is what the program, the team that I've built, we have brought in order to ensure that the expertise about children could be used and the social services and the education services in Ukraine, they paid attention to one thing, which is who are the children for whom it is beneficial to go to these trips for the short and long term. Short, will they be able to enjoy such a trip abroad? Will they be able to be away for so long? And also, they took children who were part of different communities, meaning the ones who lived in the territory for a long time, and the ones who had just come from the east because they were pushed away by the Russian army. So that they would ensure that through the children, they would create a community of people who are going to live together for a long time, and also their parents. So it's a way to ensure that it is at the benefit of the children and their communities for long term, not to speak about the women. And the social services took care of this also. They ensured that since the women are the ones taking care of the children most of the time, they also wanted to make sure that some of them could have their children out for a few weeks so that they could have, for the first time in 2, 3, 4 years, little time for themselves. So local authority from local authority, a lot of expertise to unlock that dimension, which we did. It allowed to have more enjoyment of democracy and of rights through that local-to-local approach.
Daniela or Kefei, any more to add? Okay. Daniela?
Just short about the comment that have made about host communities. 100% agree. Host communities has a crucial role in this topic. Yeah, they're affected or they have to be included. And obviously, community-based integration strategies have to be on the table. And for example, with R4B is a platform, interagency platform of the UN for Venezuelans, and includes 17 countries, and also in their migrants and refugee response plans, they include host communities. It's a real crucial part of this dynamic, and they absolutely have to be included in the solution. Thanks.
好，谢谢那个3位讲者非常精彩的这个分享，也谢谢各位朋友的这个参与跟听这个问答。我们的时间好像是差不多了，所以我们刚刚晚了一点点开始。那所以我就只说这么简短一句话，就是说，我想3位讲者大概很清楚的让我们看到，就是说，在参与这样的一个所谓的post conflict again I don't have the Chinese for that 在这样的一个脉络当中，其实我们需要每一个人的参与，不是个别的受难者或者是个别的社工就能够解决这样的问题。如果我们在台湾社会所看见的，它会是一个非常漫长的一个社会工程。那从这个意义上面来讲，和平教育如龙老师所说的正是时候，我们其实已经落很久了。那么也非常谢谢龙应台基金会提供这样一个机会，让这样的一个讨论能够在这个时候发生。那我们就在这个地方再次谢谢3位讲者这个讨论，然后也谢谢翻译帮我们的这个协助，谢谢大家。